Hello and welcome to Walk the Talk, the webcast where you walk if you want to, while we do the talking. So we don't want this to be adding to your virtual fatigue. So if you're up for it, why don't you plug your earphones in and listen while we take you on a walk. So whether that's around the house or around the block, use the next 45 minutes to nourish your body and your mind. I've chosen to stand. That's the closest thing I can do to walking. So that's also an option if you're up for it. So my name is Sarah and I'm one of the co-founders and coaches at Point 3 Wellbeing, and I'll be hosting today's Walk the Talk. And this is the second episode in this webcast series aimed at HR professionals, business leaders, and anyone who's interested in the mental health and well-being of people in the workplace. And I'm delighted today to be joined by Gemma Bullivant, who is an ICF accredited executive coach and HR consultant. Welcome, Gemma. And Gemma has a wealth of HR and coaching experience and works with organisations across HR challenges and with HR and business leaders to help them make an impact and be the best version of themselves. And it's also a pleasure to be chatting to Gemma today as our paths continue to cross since we first worked together about 10 years ago now. And if you have any questions for Gemma throughout today's session, do drop them in the chat function and we'll try to get to as many of them at the end. So today we will be unpacking psychological safety and why it's the foundation of the highest performing teams and individuals. Before exploring ways that organisations and individuals can create a culture of psychological safety within their organisations and teams. So before I introduce Gemma, why have we chosen to talk about psychological safety today? Well, firstly, it was discussed briefly in our first episode of Walk the Talk with Dr. Megan Swanson when we were discussing burnout. And if you haven't listened to that, do so. You can find it on our website or on our YouTube channel. And Dr. Megan explained that burnout, chronic stress as a result of work, occurs if your stress levels outpace the resources you have available to drain off that stress, in which case the stress just keeps accumulating. So burnout is on the rise. So we do need to find ways that we can reduce this. And the first thing that an employer can do is promote a culture of psychological safety, one which encourages people to talk openly in the workplace, which in turn can complete the stress cycle. And other reasons to why this is important to discuss today, it's more difficult than ever to create a culture of psychological safety due to the remote nature of how we are working. It requires more trust and engagement than ever before. And so if this isn't evident or practiced, cracks will begin to show more than ever before when we're a fragmented and remote workforce. So let's back up a bit and explore the theory of psychological safety. And Gemma, if I can come to you now to explain what is psychological safety and why, in your opinion, is it important?
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks for that. And thank you for inviting me today to talk about this. It's a topic I love. It's so important. And I think, it's worth us really kind of exploring it. And I'm going to be taking a look at it, first of all, in terms of what it is, but also kind of thinking about it from that work context and the sort of the environment that we find in work placements. To understand it, I think that a good place to start is the definition of Dr. Amy Edmondson, and she defines it as The belief that we will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes, and that the team is safe to make and take interpersonal risk. So I love that definition because I think it really sums up the kind of the concept in quite a good way. It's effectively saying that if an environment is psychologically unsafe, it's where we don't feel we can contribute honestly. It's where we don't feel we can speak up or challenge. It could be as basic as not feeling included at the very kind of, most basic level. But if we can't challenge something, we're also perhaps not feeling safe to innovate, not feeling safe to be creative, and not feeling like it's okay that we might make some mistakes along the way. And if you think about those concepts in terms of the work environment and think about your own teams or meetings that you're in, there are some questions to sort of really test this for you, just to sort of get a sense from your own perspective of how psychologically safe your work environment might be. And thinking about, whether you're a manager or you're a team member, if you think about the last meeting that you had, was everyone okay to contribute? Was everyone invited to contribute? Did it feel okay to disagree? Did it feel okay to ask questions? Or perhaps think about a time when you've made a mistake or somebody in the team has made a mistake. Does it feel okay to admit to that mistake? What's the manager's response like? What's the response like of other people around you? What happens as a result of a mistake being made? So thinking about some of those questions, it kind of helps us to sort of really identify the level in which we feel that psychological safety exists for us in the teams that we're in. I'll talk a little bit about why this actually shows up, because I think that's quite an important part of this. And it goes back to sort of basic biology, that sort of fight or flight threat that we're familiar with. Is there a saber-toothed tiger lurking at my cave entrance? We're wired to notice threats. We're wired to be on the alert and on the lookout for threat. We're wired to ensure that our environment is safe. Now, that could be physically safe, but it can also be psychologically safe, especially these days. And what happens is our amygdala, which is the tiny part of our little almond part of our brain, deep in our brain, is one of the oldest parts of our brain, is constantly looking for threats. And it's our autopilot. It's where we kind of, it's what drives us, what drives our behavior. So it's always looking at threats. And then another part of our brain acts as a filter to those threats, but it can't always keep up with the amygdala. So the prefrontal cortex is the area of the brain that kind of processes what's going on and figures out if it's something that we need to worry about or not. But the amygdala is already at it. The amygdala is already dealing with it. So the prefrontal cortex has to kind of keep working really hard. So sometimes those things can be off balance. And when they're off balance, it's the amygdala that wins, because it's the amygdala that is our autopilot, and it's what we are wired to listen to first, because it's there to keep us safe. So when an environment is felt or sensed to be unsafe by our amygdala, by our processing system that's been sort of wired into us over generations, we're going to respond to that with a stress response. We're going to respond to that with our defense mechanisms, our coping mechanisms. We're not going to respond to that kind of environment with the sort of openness, trust, and vulnerability, perhaps, that we need in order to be productive, creative, innovative, etc. And what we've found is, what researchers have found is that in the workplace, where teams are considered to be more psychologically safe, where they're allowed to make mistakes within, within a sort of a certain framework and within kind of, the permission that's allowed. They do innovate more, they create more, they're more productive, certainly more engaged, and generally speaking are much healthier, both physically and psychologically. And I found I did master's research a few years ago, and the thing I really kind of deep dived into in my thesis was the idea of what the connection between certain behaviours. And one of the behaviours I chose was trust, which is a version of psychological safety. And I was looking specifically at trust in management. And I found a very direct link between trust in management and employee engagement. And we know that employee engagement is connected to productivity. And I would suggest these are all interlinked. The definition of trust that I used was the sort of the extent to which we're prepared to take a risk for something or someone else. So you can see it's quite connected to the idea of psychological safety. So in many ways, the concept of psychological safety has been with us for a long time, albeit under the sort of broader definition of trust. But it comes back to that idea of trust.
That's super interesting. Thank you, Gemma. And there's lots to unpack there. But I always find it really useful to sort of think back and to remind ourselves what's actually happening in the brain when we're faced with those threats or perceived threats. And so just building on this a little bit more, why do you think this notion of psychological safety is even more important now, perhaps in the remote environment that we're working in?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think when people are sort of out of sight, are they out of mind? And this kind of this comfort blanket, if you like, of a manager feeling like they can see what's happening, as opposed to having that trust that it is happening and having ways to be able to sort of see that it's happening, is a real shift that we've had to make, and we've had to make it overnight in this environment. We've had no gradual kind of getting used to this with a sort of a nice kind of managed, flexible remote working kind of gradual introduction across organizations. It's literally had to be adjusted to very, very quickly. And I think one of the things that happens when it comes back to that sense of control, and managers have this kind of need, quite understandably, I get it completely, of this fear that they may be out of control, and so will start to become more controlling, perhaps more directive, and actually appearing to be a lot less trusting because of the behaviors or the style or this kind of sense of I've got to actually hold on tighter. Amy Edmondson talks about this a bit because she's been talking about psychological safety in the current environment, and she talks about this, the leaders are kind of tempted to just hold tighter and tighter and control more and more, in an environment where actually the opposite is needed but feels really, really difficult to do. I think that the other thing about the current environment is it's so uncertain, and we know we've worked in certain environments before, and I think in some ways we almost feel like we know what we're doing. The VUCA world, this volatile, uncertain, etc. world. But of course, what we've been presented with in the last year has been nothing like anything we could have imagined, and the uncertainty presents another challenge for leaders, because what some leaders feel is needed is providing certainty, providing direction, having all of the answers, being somebody that actually can create the journey and the way forward for the team. And in this kind of environment, that's really, really tricky to do. So how do you do that and maintain it safely, maintain this sense of psychological safety? And Amy Edmondson talks about, sums this up in a phrase that I just think is so important. It stayed with me the minute I heard her say it on a podcast, which is, you need, as a leader, you need to let people know that you've got the compass, not the map. So people need to have faith that you know the general direction of travel, but you don't necessarily know the exact route that we're going to take, but they trust that you will guide them in the right direction. So it's in two ways. It feels counterintuitive. We need to somehow find ways to be less controlling and find ways to feel comfortable that we don't know all the answers, but we still keep communicating, because a void of communication is not going to help either.
No. Wow, that's super interesting, Gemma. And I'm sure that many can relate to this right now, when so much is out of our control. And you talk of trust and its relationship with employee engagement, two things that were very much at the heart of your thesis. How do they, in your mind, relate to psychological safety?
Yeah, I think it comes down to this concept of risk. So when I was doing my thesis, I originally started with the idea of looking at some other behaviors. So in positive psychology, there's a framework called PsyCap, which is all about hope, self-efficacy, resilience, and optimism. And my original plan was to see how those four behaviors correlated and were connected to employee engagement. But I felt really strongly that there was one missing. And what was missing was trust. What was missing was the idea of somebody taking a risk, taking a personal risk to say something, do something, challenge, contribute, make mistakes that in some way could actually further, the team or the challenge or whatever it might be within the workplace. And so I added trust into the mix, basically. So I did PsyCap and trust in management as my overall study. And it comes back to that sense of risk. It comes back to how much you're willing to step outside your comfort zone, which we know is where the magic happens. If we feel safe to move out of our comfort zone, we're in a stretch zone or a learning zone. We're in the zone where we can either move things forward, try new things, or learn things, or all of those things. And so I think there are sort of 5 key areas to really think about when we're talking about psychological safety. And when we're talking about psychological safety in terms of what we can do about it rather than what it is. And I think the first thing is vulnerability. Mm-hmm. Is that idea that it is okay to show the chinks in your armor. It's okay to not have all of the answers. It's okay to let people know it's a compass in your hand. It's not a map, it's a compass. But you keep engaging, you keep showing up, you keep creating an environment where people can also share their own vulnerability. Brené Brown obviously is someone that most people know in relation to vulnerability. She says that vulnerability is not winning or losing. It's having the courage to show up when you can't control the outcome. Now, I love that quote because it just talks about what vulnerability is in its absolute essence. It's courage. It's courage when you don't know. It's courage when things might go wrong. It's not having all of the answers. It's not the outcome. It's actually just being there. And, you know, we all fall into that trap, don't we? That we feel we need to know the answers. We need to be able to somehow help the other person, provide the sort of the solution for the other person. And I think, you know, if we actually step back and say people just need to trust that we can actually get there together, and that we can collaborate together. And the danger of waiting is that we create that disconnect, because what we're doing, we're waiting out of all of the best intentions, because we don't have all of the answers, but we're creating too big a gap for people. And so, you know, the void in communication, people start filling it with their own thoughts, their own ideas, because you simply, you know, not keeping people with you with that compass rather than the map. You know, Jacinda Ardern is a great example of this. The New Zealand Prime Minister, she showed up very early without all of the answers, and communicated to the country in no uncertain terms that what we know right now is this, and this is what we're going to do. And the country went into level 2 lockdown, and 2 days later went into level 4 lockdown. She just showed up and did it, but did it in a way that showed that she was just showing you what she knew there and then she kind of kept building on that. I think the second one that I want to talk about is that idea. I've talked about it a little bit about making mistakes, but the idea of it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to fail. And I love the kind of the concept of failing forward. It's something written by a guy called John C. Maxwell, and he talks about the idea that actually it's effectively about learning from our mistakes. So it's effectively kind of, you know, thinking about an environment where failure is okay if we're learning. You know, making mistakes is okay if we're learning. If we keep making the same mistakes, then maybe we've got a bit of a problem. But the mistake itself, you know, first and foremost, isn't the problem. It's how we deal with it, how we approach it. And from psychological safety perspective, feeling safe to fail is crucial, because we need to feel safe that we can actually own up to a mistake. So you think about some of the questions I was asking earlier on, you know, is this environment safe for me to actually kind of own up to something that's gone wrong? Failing in something doesn't define you as a failure. It's the activity that's failed, not you as a person. And sometimes those can get really, really confused as well. So, you know, as a leader or a manager or a team member, you don't have to have that authority or that power to respond in a fail forward kind of way to our mistakes and to other people's mistakes. We take, if we can safely take the approach that we're learning from our mistakes, then that's a really powerful mechanism to creating a safe environment, psychologically safe environment. Lovely. Those are my first two. Did you want to ask me anything about those two before I crack on with my others?
So the first two, just to summarize, so we've had vulnerability, and I do want to talk about that a little bit more shortly, but then this idea of failing forward. So before we explore some more around vulnerability, what are the other tenets, if you like?
So the third one is about questions. It's about establishing an open environment where we can ask questions. And it's as a leader, it's much more than the sort of the my door is always open approach, which is a great start, and definitely something that is better than nothing. But there needs to be more. There needs to actually be explicit, proactive questions more regularly than just leaving the door open for questions. It's about encouraging engagement. It's about encouraging contribution. It's about inviting ideas. and generating that diversity of opinion. And that kind of environment is really crucial. And the more that you ask, the more people are likely to contribute, and therefore it's more likely to kind of create that environment where people feel it's okay to pop their head round the virtual open door and say something unprompted as well. And a bit linked to that is the fourth one, which is permission. And I think, you know, as a leader, it's really important to make sure that people know that this is not only allowed, it's encouraged. It's something that you need to give people permission to do those things, give people the permission to ask questions, give people the permission to challenge your ideas, be quite open that, you know, your ideas may not be the best ideas. Back to that vulnerability point, give people the permission to disagree with you, and ensure that you want to establish the ways of working and the ways you want to operate as a team that's going to make that environment productive, creative, innovative, and safe. And then the fifth one is the one that I've mentioned, which underpins it all, which is trust.
Yeah.
It's essentially a contract of risk and reward. So people will take certain risks if they know that they're going to be A, safe to do so, but B, perhaps even praised for doing so, because it's all part of creating the right kind of environment. And you know, if we're willing to take a certain degree of personal risk, then we are much more likely to do all of those things. And so it sits at the heart of everything, and almost feeds all of those other points.
Okay, so let's just summarize. So 5 points: vulnerability, failing forward. The third was questions, so asking questions, being encouraged to ask questions, so sort of curiosity. The fourth, having that permission, so that really being encouraged to ask questions. And the final one of trust, which really underpins all of those things. Okay, so moving into, so we've touched on theory, but moving maybe into more sort of practical ways that organisations and individuals can encourage these 5 principles, if you like. Another expert on the subject of psychological safety that we talk a lot about is Daniel Coyle, and from his book, The Culture Code, he refers to 3 key ingredients to the highest performing teams. The first being psychological safety, the second being vulnerability, and then this third, which is around having a common goal and purpose and a clear path to getting there. Which I think mirrors quite a lot of what you've covered so far. So how can an organisation sort of promote this environment, this culture, with safety at its core, which we know then leads to the highest performing teams and individuals?
Yeah, well, I mean, it starts from the top, if at all possible. You know, leading by example. The CEO and the senior leaders are the ones that are ultimately responsible for setting the tone, setting the culture, showing the behaviours that they want to nurture and promote within the organisation. Sometimes that's really hard, you know, especially if there's a leader who isn't the epitome of those things. And I would say that doesn't mean it can't happen, because at the heart of every culture, or at the sort of a culture is formed at many levels. So you've got the sort of the macro culture, the sort of the idea of the sort of the general kind of ways of working and values and principles that are kind of embedded in the culture through how the leadership team operate. But culture happens in each and every room, each and every conversation, each and every sort of transaction, if you like, discussion, decision. So what you find in organizational cultures is lots of subcultures. And they're inevitable because they're just led by, managers that sit further down. So when I've worked in organizations where the leadership haven't necessarily been particularly strong in this area, I've then sort of kind of gone, okay, well, let's work with the next layer down, or several layers down. Let's kind of work with getting some team to really kind of show the way, to help build a bit of a kind of a movement, if you like, towards this being a way of working, because the jungle drums spread. People know certain areas work in certain ways, and usually that is by virtue of who's in charge of that particular area, regardless of who the CEO might be. So I think it's really important to ensure that managers feel they have the skills to do some of those things, to actually take the approach of asking questions, to take the approach of giving permission, to take the approach of that vulnerability piece, and just enabling some cultural movement to start shifting in the sort of in the different pockets of the organization, with the overall aim to kind of pull it all together into a culture change that way, sort of culture change by stealth, if you will.
Very much leading by example, and that regardless of where you are in the organization hierarchy, whether you're a senior leader or a manager or just a team member, really leading by example.
Yeah. And I think it needs to be wired into some of the systems and the processes that you've got. So, does the idea of asking questions, challenge, etc., is that reflected in how one-to-ones happen, in how performance management happens, in whatever way it might happen in your organization, in how team meetings are run? Are people invited to contribute to meetings with their own ideas, or is it always led by the senior manager? There are sometimes I can think back to meetings that I've attended, and when I've been in different organizations where every meeting you kind of know what the format's going to be, and sometimes it's all about we're just going to hear from the senior manager for the next hour, and sometimes it's actually genuinely, I've brought so and so in to talk to us about this, I've asked for this team member to give us their thoughts on. Really different way of actually organizing effectively what the same meeting. So I think sometimes some of those kind of little shifts, that kind of that nudge theory kind of idea of just not allowing yourself to feel overwhelmed by the fact that shifting a culture is a massive thing, and instead focusing on how you can nudge the subcultures along in the right direction all together, so that it's all moving together, but actually kind of just doing those gentle nudges at a sort of a smaller level to try and kind of move things forward that way.
Okay, so I mean, that all sounds great in sort of theory, but sort of what pointers perhaps could you give to an HR professional or business leader that's listening to the webcast right now, in terms of putting some of that into practice to create that sort of subculture, as you say?
Well, I mean, I am a strong believer in coaching. I'm a coach. So I think that, thinking about the management style and the management skills of the management population from the perspective of, are they taking a coaching approach to each and every conversation? Do they have the coaching skills? We're not suggesting that they need to be coaches. There's, it's about the coaching approach to management. So a coaching approach to management is ask, not tell, predominantly. There's always a place for when tell is actually required, and that can still form part of the relationship. But predominantly, are we asking the right questions? Are we listening? Are we listening properly to what people are saying? Are we giving people the time to contribute? Are we giving people the permission to contribute? These are all coaching skills, effectively. And I worked in an organization where it very much had a coaching approach to things, but it had not made the connection between the coaching skills and management, but also the coaching skills and client relationships, or the coaching skills and relationships with team members and peers. So taking the coaching approach to a client relationship was incredibly powerful, because you're talking to a client and you're asking lots of questions and you're listening really carefully to what they're saying, and you're hearing what they're saying, and you're not trying to provide the solution instantly. You're trying to help them figure out what the problem is to address first, finding out what they've done, what they've tried, finding out kind of what obstacles are in the way, all the sorts of things that form a really kind of the basics of coaching. Those managers were able to take those coaching skills that we kind of gave them in training to actually apply to doing their day job, as well as taking a sort of a coaching approach to management in the sort of the managerial side of their job too. So I think first and foremost, a coaching approach to conversations in its kind of broadest sense would go a long way to helping teams really establish this kind of environment, this safer environment.
Yeah, and that in turn will lead to greater innovation, and that's win-win for individuals, for teams, for organizations. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think there's another one that we haven't really touched on, but that comes down to the heart of coaching as well, which is the idea of taking a non-judgmental approach to things, because often what happens is that we naturally form opinions, judgments, we have perceptions, we have our own biases that sort of come into action, and really kind of getting an understanding and a commitment to yourself and others that you're going to take that non-judgmental approach where you possibly can. And that goes back a little bit to what I said about failure. And failure doesn't mean failing at something doesn't mean you are a failure. That connection is all too easy to make, and really it's very unhelpful. Failing at something means that something hasn't worked, not that the person's a failure in some way. And that's where judgment can start to creep in without us noticing. So I think it's really important for us to remember that we're in a much more open and powerful and much more likely to foster psychological safety if we take a non-judgmental approach where we possibly can. Come to the meeting with unconditional positive regard. That was something that was drummed into me as a coach. Go to each and every coaching relationship with unconditional positive regard. Leave your opinions and judgments as much as possible out of the conversation until you fully understand what's going on for that person. Yeah. And that would go a long way to helping with this as well.
Well, hold that thought. I do want to ask another question on that. But firstly, we're really interested in this webcast to help people turn sort of awareness into action, and knowing that we all have a role in terms of leading by example and creating this culture and subcultures of psychological safety. I'd like to give our audience a moment to reflect on the 5 tenets that you talked about to psychological safety, and to do a little bit of a self-audit, because it's not often that we have the opportunity to self-reflect on some theory that we might have just heard about. So I'm going to invite the audience to reflect for a moment on these 5 points: vulnerability, failing forward, this notion of encouraging and asking questions and having the permission to do so, and having this sort of implicit trust, both from an individual perspective, but also to think about it from an organizational perspective, and to give yourselves a score, and this is for your own personal interest only, on score out of 10, with 1 being low and 10 being high, where you currently think you plot yourself in each of these areas, and knowing that these are all, it's a sliding scale, and you can grow this and develop this with more awareness. So I'm just going to give the audience 30 seconds to think about these 5 things before we wrap up today's conversation. And in the meantime, if anyone has got any questions for Gemma, please do pop those in the chat function or in the Q&A, and we will look to come to those very shortly. Give another 10 seconds here. And if you do find that you are low in any areas, just bringing a bit more sort of conscious awareness to how you might take action by using some of these principles in your leadership of your teams and your organization. They are things that can be practiced. So as one of the things we do like to say at point 3 is, don't let perfection get in the way of progress. In fact, that's the very sort of essence of psychological safety. So don't let fear of failure get in the way of trying something a bit new with regards to these 5 elements. Okay, so I can see a question has popped in. So in the meantime, I'll invite some more questions, but whilst people are typing their questions in the chat function, another one for you, Gemma. And, you know, we touched on this sort of idea of non-judgmental approach to situations, and also exploring sort of vulnerability and psychological safety. One of the areas that we're trying to address with our mental health training is to help sort of bust the stigma that surrounds the subject. And one statistic from Time to Change charity says less than half of employees say they would feel open and able to talk to their line manager if they were suffering from stress in the workplace, for fear of being judged or penalised. All of those things that we've sort of touched on today, that are the cost really of not having a culture of psychological safety. So there's obviously still a long way to go. Any initial thoughts on how we can help to break down the stigma around mental health?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I think it's one that we need to really make sure we keep doing. My take on that is awareness and education. So I speak really from personal experience, in that it's one thing to know the concepts conceptually. It's one thing to know the theory. It's one thing to be aware of something, but it's another thing to actually make the connection to yourself and to others. And for me, I did the mental health first aid course a few months ago, and making with you, yes, and making the connection. I knew a lot of the concepts, and obviously I've been aware of, you know, I've got psychology masters, I've been in HR for umpty years, but still that connection between the fact that we all operate on a spectrum all of the time. So we all have a position on the mental health spectrum. That's not to say we all have a diagnosed condition, not by any stretch of the imagination, but it really helped to hammer home the fact that it really isn't an either or. You don't either have it or you don't have it. We all have it to a degree. And I think that everyone really kind of just getting a sense of that for themselves is not only allowing ourselves to feel comfortable to talk about it. We can talk about something because we feel we've got a bit more of an understanding about it, so we're much more likely to, because we might not want to talk about something if we don't feel we know enough about it. And then just be able to do some of the things that we've talked about, these asking questions and giving permission for people to be open and honest in each and every conversation. I love that Take 10 initiative, or 10 that I think it's Mental Health England that ran it. That idea of sort of just giving the prompt that a 10-minute conversation might actually be all it takes. And having that 10-minute conversation can be so powerful, because it can just mean that conversation starts and it continues, and it doesn't have to be a scheduled, every couple of weeks we've got an hour together to talk mental health. It's just actually normalizing the conversation in our, in every day, that I think starts with awareness and training.
Lovely, thank you. I can see that the questions come through, but for some reason I can't actually see it. So if the person could pop it into the chat function, or unless Gemma, you are able.
I can see it.
Okay.
I can see it. I'll take it.
Thank you, Gemma.
There's a question. The question is there a certain style of leadership that nurtures psychological safety, e.g. servant leadership? Which is a great question. I think there is. I think it goes back to what I was talking about, a coaching approach. I think that, and the idea of that controlling style that I talked about before, where the more the leader feels they need to control, the more they are trying to determine the outcome rather than encouraging input to the outcome, the less open to the idea of a psychologically safe environment. It's not going to promote that safety. Now, the challenge is getting the balance right, because you've still got to show up. So, the Jacinda Ardern still showed up. So you do, it isn't about kind of going deep into collaboration and deep into coaching and not saying anything till you've got everybody's ideas together. There needs to be the right kind of balance between providing some clear kind of guidance and direction without going too much into, this is what I need from you right now, and taking that control. So I hope I haven't sat on the fence too much with the answer to that question, but I think fundamentally anything that's more kind of a coaching approach to leadership, sometimes it's called sort of the democratic style, something that is kind of less authoritative and directive and more collaborative, is likely to create a psychologically safe environment.
Or more in service to others, perhaps, yeah. Okay, well, we have run over a little bit. So in the interests of wrapping it up, thank you so much, Gemma, for your time today. We always end our webcasts by asking our guests how they walk the talk when it comes to managing their well-being. So can you share 3 things that you prioritize to optimize your well-being? And maybe it'll inspire us.
I'm not sure how inspirational mine are, because they are very, very straightforward. Exercise. I have to have exercise, even if it's literally just going for a walk. I need that fresh air and that exercise. But in particular, I love spending time in nature. And I'm increasingly a fan of the Or walk. I don't know if you've come across that concept, but the idea of just noticing things, noticing the size of a tree or the colour of a flower or whatever it might be, the smell of the air. And the third is sleep. I have to prioritise my sleep, otherwise I am no good to anyone.
That's brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Gemma, for sharing those. And we hear you're singing our the same hymn sheet to us, so thank you. Okay, so that concludes today's webcast. And if you do have any further questions and you'd like to get in touch with Point 3 or indeed with Gemma, do drop us an email at b_well@point3wellbeing.com. And a little heads up to our next webcast, which will take place on Tuesday, the 6th of April, when we'll be talking about busting stigma in the workplace. April is Stress Awareness Month. So we will be inviting Dan Strachan, who's a mental health ambassador for Mind Charity, who's going to be talking about his own personal experiences of mental ill health in the workplace and how we work towards breaking down the stigma. So I do hope you'll join us then, Tuesday, 6th of April at 9:30. That just leaves me to say thank you so much for joining us today, and I wish you well for the rest of the day, and thank you once again, Gemma. Take care.
Thank you.